Hello and welcome to a presentation of a paper that was recently published in Combustion Flame. My name is Philipp Bonner and our research dealt with thermoacoustic feedback mechanisms for the premixed burner with a reacting jet in crossflow being exposed to self-excited thermoacoustic instability. This research was a collaboration between Technical University of Munich, SIEMENS Energy, the German Aerospace Center and the University of Duisburg-Essen. So what is thermoacoustic research all about? So at the very end we want to determine if a system is stable or not. We want to determine if pressure oscillations will grow or if they will decay. So what do we have to do in case we don't want to test all operation conditions? We have to build models. So normally we determine a flame model and then we use this flame model in an acoustic solver to close the equations. To be able to determine a model, we have to be well aware of the feedback mechanisms. And even though this is the last year of my PhD, it took me quite some time and I had to read the thesis of my former colleague Moritz Merck to understand that this is the core of our work. So the problem is, what about models for a reacting jet in crossflow being exposed to high frequency dynamics? We don't know about the feedback mechanisms. They are not well understood. Therefore, we cannot build models, hence we cannot determine stability of the system. Why is it that complicated? First of all, the reacting jet offers, or it features a multitude of vortex structures, and therefore it offers plenty of opportunities that the flow can interact with the flame. And think about the interaction between acoustics and the flame. For example, if we have a transversal-longitudinal mixed mode, the jet encounters forcing from all sides, parallel to its axis, orthogonal to its axis. Luckily, the German Aerospace Center investigated a configuration with a jet in crossflow and they made the experimental data available to us. Hence, we could compare the experimental flame images with those images that we produced with large eddy simulation, and we could also compare the acoustic spectrum that we got from those experiments with our large eddy simulation, and they match quite well. For further analysis of the large eddy simulation, comparing the results to the experimental results, I refer you to the paper. So in initial studies, we identified that equivalence ratio fluctuations, they play a crucial role in this case. Therefore, we thought, why not mitigating this mechanism by an artificial, perfectly premixed second stage? This is what we did. So in the subsequent analysis, we will have a closer look on two simulations. First, there's a simulation with a technically premixed first and a technically premixed second stage. This is what we call simulation TP-TP on the left. Then we have a simulation with a perfectly premixed first stage and a with a technically premixed first stage and a perfectly premixed second stage. Hence, we mitigate equivalence ratio fluctuations. Both of those configurations, they showed self-excited thermoacoustic instability. On the left-hand side, this is the first longitudinal mode that was also observable in the experiment. And I want to highlight the frequency, around about 2 kHz. And the simulation with the perfectly premixed second stage, this simulation showed a transversal longitudinal mixed mode, modulating at much higher frequency, around about 5000 Hz. So, as a subsequent analysis, we had a look at the flame dynamics. I want to quickly explain the procedure that we applied here. First of all, we applied modal decomposition techniques Hence, we applied a dynamic mode decomposition. We pick only the dominant mode and the zero frequency mode and use those two modes to apply the inverse transformation back to time domain. So this is a very effective filtering method. So the simulation TP-TP showed strong bending of the jet due to acoustic forcing. So the longitudinal, so it's orthogonal to the jet axis, that kind of forcing forced the jet to exactly display that kind of phenomena. The simulation with the perfectly premixed second stage showed a strong shear layer modulation. The next question we wanted to answer is what kind of interaction mechanisms are present? So the heat release is affected by different parameters. First of all, we have the density of the unburned gases, there's the enthalpy of reaction, we have the flame speed and the flame surface. What we did, we evaluated those quantities on an isosurface, applied a Fourier transformation, and then had a look at those Fourier quantities in a Phasor diagram. This Phasor diagram gave us the answer on the phase lags between those quantities. And here they are. I just want to mention that we displayed equivalence ratio fluctuation instead of the enthalpy of reaction, because equivalence ratio is directly measurable. So for the simulation with the technical premixing, we see that flame surface modulations, they are in phase with heat release modulations, as well as equivalence ratio fluctuation and the flame speed. For the simulation with the perfectly premixed second stage, we only could determine the density fluctuations are in phase with heat release modulations. So let's sum up and let's draw conclusions. So we investigated a burner with a reacting jet in cross-flow. There were two self-excited thermoacoustic instabilities given the operating point. First, with the technical premixing, we see a longitudinal mode. With the perfect premixing in the second stage, we see a transverse longitudinal mixed mode. The technical premixing shows strong bending and flapping of the jet at around about 2 kHz, and we can see that flame surface modulations are in phase. So the orthogonal acoustic forcing creates or generates and destroys flame surface, as well as equivalence ratio are in phase and also the flame speed. For the perfectly premixing, we see strong shear layer activity round about or at round about 5 kHz. Surprisingly, this does not lead to flame surface modulations. We only could detect that density fluctuations are in phase. Now let's come back to one of the first slides. So now we know the feedback mechanisms for a reacting jet in crossflow, hence we can suggest models. So our model suggestions are the following. For the technical premixing, we see that orthogonal velocity fluctuations are an input to a flame model, or might be a valuable input to a flame model, which determines heat release rate. And we want to emphasize that also equivalence ratio fluctuations, even in this high frequency regime, plays a crucial role. For the perfectly premixing, we only identify density fluctuations in phase with heat release rate. Hence, density fluctuations are directly linked for an acoustic wave to pressure fluctuations, and given that we know pressure fluctuations from the acoustic solver, we can close the computational loop to determine heat release fluctuations. So we suggest the model that the heat release is a function of the acoustic pressure. Last but not least, I want to thank again my co-authors. Without them, this research wouldn't be possible, and I invite you to have a look into the paper.